Well, the title of our talk today is Logotherapy as a must and not a maybe in our times and in the world today. Why am I saying this? As we all know, logotherapy is based on the works of Viktor Frankl. And why logotherapy is so powerful is that it has been tested in the fire of affliction, in the most gross and horrific circumstances imaginable. And the evidence that came out of it is the message for our times. Because first of all, it said that we have a defiant power of spirit that can look at what is happening in the world and what is happening to us, and come to a deeply refined realization of what Frankl said ought not to be. Suffering makes us aware of what ought not to be, but at the same time, it makes us keenly aware of what ought to be. And it's with this realization of what ought to be that Frankl came out of the Nazi concentration and death camps. And where he could say, you know, as he reviewed the suffering that he had gone through in losing his wife, his father, his mother, his brother. If somebody suffers that much, or if we are afflicted with suffering, it means it must be something waiting for us, something we are called upon to do. And Frankl set out to realize what he had already realized before the Holocaust, but you know, suffering refines what we intuitively know. It makes it real, it makes it urgent, it makes it a challenge. And we cannot be passive bystanders, indifferent, saying, oh, well, what's happening in our world, the problems, the woes that we see around us, it hasn't got anything much to do with us. We will seek our little area of comfort and happiness and shut our eyes and ears to the world. Then you shut yourself to the fundamental meaning of life. Frankl emerged from the camps, and as he reflected on the vicious propaganda that slandered a people to make them vermin, and where people, the perpetrators, became convinced in an ideological cause that it was right to kill. So warped they had become that Frankl said he had to rehumanize this kind of thinking that box people in and give them a category and removes them from involvement with you. And I want to, in what Frankl said, that what the world needs is a new humankind, one with a unity of purpose. That is why he said, if the world is not to destroy itself, if mankind is not to destroy itself, it will have to find a common will to common meaning. Now, how does this play out in our lives? How do these problems address us? Because you know what? We cannot escape the tragic factualities of life, the fact that we're going to die, and which makes a life a task, a once given opportunity, and which brings the command to use the passing time and to use it well, as Frankl said. And we cannot escape the fact that not only our mortality, but our fallibility leads us into wrongdoing, into foolish decisions, we have to learn. And we learn no more acutely than when we are cornered by tragedy ourselves. But what is the tragic optimism that Frankl spoke about? Because suffering only presents a challenge. It's a wake-up call. What's happening in the world today, our emergence from the COVID-19 pandemic, still ravaging the world, and now this awful war of one nation trying to take over and dominate another, the Russian incursion into the Ukraine, all of these things are wake-up calls. And you can say, well, what can I do about those big problems? But you know, I was so inspired to give this talk today as a result of a discussion that we as trainers had with our students and a Zoom meeting before. When we actually contemplated what makes for effective logotherapy, for an effective and healing transition and interaction between logotherapist and client. And it's that realization that hit home to me that I want to illustrate today in showing what we, each one of us, inescapably confronted with our own conscience and with our own intuitive knowing of what is right and what is wrong, what we are, each one in our distinctive circumstances and places where we find ourselves, have to answer the challenge that life gives to us. What are you doing in your circumstances with your life? Where are you headed? What are you living for? Because let me tell you, that common will to common meaning will not be found unless each one of us realize what the meaning of our lives are. And I want to illustrate two distinctive features of logotherapy to just make us think about this issue of what we are living for and what it is we are challenged to do and what destination we are ordained to reach. Because, you know, a common will to common meaning doesn't fall out of the sky. It asks for action. And each one of us have a part to play. Even if we're not involved with those big events, we either make our irreplaceable contribution to the world or we fail to do so tragically. And that is why tragedy befalls us, to wake us up and say, Adam, where are you? We are each addressed by name. Like Frankl said, we cannot else but live answerable lives. You know, when I was so shattered by what Frankl shared about his Holocaust experiences, which actually motivated my husband and I to join survivor organizations in South Africa. And I was stunned. I didn't have an answer to the suffering they had gone through. And, you know, as I kind of cried out, like Frankel said, is there any meaning in all this suffering? I had to get a yes myself. And I wrote a little poem. And it was entitled The Jewish Question. Where was God in the Holocaust? How can I answer you? I can only be here to hear what the answer to that question is. And when I asked God, where were you in the Holocaust? He answered me, where were you? We can't close our eyes to people who suffer and who need us, and who the appeal is for us to have that kind of broken-hearted compassion. And here is where the secret of human destination lies. Frankl spoke about the unscathed human spirit. And I want to put it to you this way. And I read a beautiful saying of a wonderful rabbi, Shlomo Karlebach. We called him the singing rabbi, who had a great love for humanity. He always sought out the outcast, the lonely, the abandoned. He moved among drug addicts and those who were desperate. And, he had such a great heart. And this is what he wrote. You are born into the world, but until someone comes to you and tells you, I love you, you are still a stranger. You feel like a stranger. You are not really here yet. And here it is at the very outset of our lives. Every human infant has a consciousness that Frankl says is intentionally directed. He said human consciousness is intentionally directed. What does he mean? It seeks an object to connect to. It seeks a significant other. It wants to experience a yes from life in terms of being seen and heard and acknowledged and designated as needed and wanted in this world. This, as a developmental psychologist, I can tell you, is the start of healthy personality development. And everything that assails that brings about the sorrow and the grief and the anguish that we see when people suffer and cannot find a meaning to their sufferings. When they feel discarded, left out, abandoned, not seen, not heard. So what is that? Frankl called it a fundamental will to meaning. Now just ask yourself, why have this will to meaning to connect and become part of a life-giving, interactive relationship that affirms your existence and that you can respond to with an ever-growing love? If you have a will to meaning, and that meaning is not to be found, it's senseless. But how is that meaning? That what Frankl said, what we all need is an unconditional faith in the unconditional meaningfulness of life, to believe that we are spoken to by someone other than ourselves, a benevolent figure that calls us to come into his arms. But how does that happen? If we do not come into one another's arms, that presence cannot be made real to the point that that which assails it and which ought not to be can be defeated and triumphantly overcome. So what is the human destination? You know, it was this wonderful realization that hit through home to me in our last Zoom discussion. When we discussed what a successful logotherapeutic encounter would look like, and we came to the conclusion together, it's a face-to-face intimacy, a face-to-face interaction between essentially the logotherapist that says yes to the client's life. And how can we say yes to somebody else's life unless Fraggle says we believe in its inherent worth and we actually see the uniqueness of that life, smothered as it may be, trampled upon as it may be, confused, hidden in confusion as it may be, but we see it. And we can say, I see you. I hear you. You are, like as Solomon said to a Shulamite woman that kept on protesting, but in the end, she realized what he said to her. You are altogether lovely, my love. Altogether. This is what Frankel said. Unconditional meaningfulness of life is dependent on the unconditional worth and integrity of the individual human being. And if we don't see that, we will, as we discussed in the previous session, relate to somebody else as an it, as a type, as a category. We would be removed from, we would be shutting our eyes and ears to, we will be actually forcing people into sameness. And that is why Frankel said logotherapy is a teaching to an education towards responsibility. What is that responsibility? You know, what I realized was every right answer to every situation, every responsible reaction to what a situation calls me to be or what I am called upon to do is a moral choice. You know, in the past, I kind of thought of, you know, the task character of life, that there's a kind of a vocational mission in life, what you are doing out there in the world. That's part of it, but that's not the essential. Because if you are out there in the world, giving a service and, thinking that you're doing good, but you are not really fully there in terms of having your particular service directed towards helping those that you are working with or that you are reaching out to. If your service is not motivated morally, then you know what? It might be good, it does some good, but it is not powerfully effective. It misses the mark. Because whatever you do, you can measure in terms of what does it do? What are the implications of it? What are the ramifications and consequences for those out there that will be involved with what I'm doing? That's the only, let's think about, let's just look at this, every, let's look at meaning as something moral. Moral. Frankl spoke about conscience as our meaning organ, right? Elizabeth Lucas spoke about conscience as our ethical sensitivity. And I'm sorry, but there's only one way. Only one way. And that is, like it was said, the whole law can be summed up in this, that you love your neighbor as yourself. Without that love, everything you do, because there are lots of things being done arrogantly and kind of with a accent of who am I? I'm so important in the world. My word. If you're not brokenheartedly and with great compassion reaching out to your fellow man, you're missing the mark. So let's come to what is the ultimate, what does meaning really mean in an ethical and moral sense? Frankl said, man lives in and through values, okay? And he spoke about the creative values. But that is serving a cause, but a cause in which direction? A cause directed to the good and of others, in how it can help and assist and make a contribution to raising the quality of life of others. That's a real creative value. It's got a moral thrust. If it hasn't, it's missing the mark. And what about experiential values? Every action and attitude that are truly meaningful, that is truly meaningful, as we discussed in our last Zoom session, is something good. It benefits somebody. It's always beautiful. It's never something ugly, sly, hostile, or hidden behind a hypocritical front. And it's always truthful. It is a face-to-face encounter, and it doesn't lie. It doesn't use the person, and it doesn't, arrogantly preach or advise or tell other people how to live. You haven't got that right. Like Frankl said, if you want people to believe in your God, you've got to portray that God believably. If we want to really get through to other people, we must be believable people. How can we want to help others to find meaning in their lives if we have not found that meaning ourselves? And if we do not realize that is what the attitudinal values do. I am here. I am here for others, not for myself. And the more I am for others, the more I become myself. So here we've got logotherapy in a nutshell. It's the intent of human existence, that we are meant to find meaning, and that's why we have a will to meaning. But that meaning can only be found if it touches and transforms another life for the good. Whatever you do, a street sweeper can make his street sweeping meaningful if he thinks, I'm making this environment beautiful for other people. It's ugly to see waste and rubbish. I'm making the world a better place for other people. And that is why, the final destiny and listen to this. And we're going to discuss this afterwards, but this is enough to just say it within this context. The ultimate destiny is not something out there and abstract, and there's some theology that we can hardly grasp. It's the measurement of how much you love. And you know, what will bring down walls of division, of hurt, of hostility, everything that is hurtful or confusing? What brings those walls down and actually defeat them in the bigger sense of the word too, out there in the world? It's when you can see the distinctive uniqueness of your fellow human being, the sacredness of their space in life, their right to life, that you will work in yourself to not hurt or harm, and to not overstep the boundaries of another one's space and intrude and take it over or dominate it. You've got to overcome these ugly urges that come to you and appeals to your selfishness and to your wanting to, I, the kind of I. You are only an I when the other can look at you and say, thank you for loving me. It's when we find that common will to love each other and to see each other in our preciousness and how we are called to become the very best, actually to achieve human greatness. Behold the man. That is what it's all about. But behold the man, what kind of beholding is that? Oh, how much the person has laid down his life in love for others. And that is what makes us great. Thank you.